I have stacked together, I think, 15 books that I thought were really great this year. Some of them are fairly new, a lot of them are pretty old. Some of them are classics or things you might have heard of, some are a little more obscure. We've got essays, short stories, novels, all sorts of things. So I hope that you will stick around and find at least, hopefully one book that you can take away from my list this year that you might want to, read next year. I'm realizing now, last year I did 6 books, this year I'm doing 15. So I'm going to try and keep them brief because otherwise, I have to edit this and you have to watch it. And I'd rather, frankly, be reading. So here we go. Without further ado, here are the 15 best books I read this year, give or take a couple. So first, just because I've talked about it before, is Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. I didn't technically read this in 2025. I read it in late December of 2024, after I made last year's recap video. So I figured I'd talk about it a little bit right now. I talk about Ray Bradbury quite a lot, which I think at some point maybe I'll make a video breaking down which of his books I actually don't like as much, so I don't just sound like I always love everything he says. But Dandelion Wine is my favorite of his books. It's about a boy named Douglas Spalding in the summer of 1928 in Illinois. And it is just kind of, not a lot happens. I've read some negative reviews about this where people are like, where's the plot? It's not a very plot-heavy book. It's just a coming-of-age story, and it is just a lot of very nostalgic, very flowery language. But there were so many times when I was reading this book and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's true, that's real. That makes me understand the world a little bit differently. So it might not be your cup of tea, but it definitely was one of my very favorite things I read. So I just wanted to quickly mention that. Okay, another one. I had not read this for the first time technically this year, but it's the first time I had really paid attention to it. Robert Frost as a poet as a whole. I haven't read every poem he's ever written, and this isn't every poem he's ever written, but I just really enjoyed it. And I'll just give you one poem I enjoyed particularly this year, and that was Goodbye and Keep Cold. And you can I'll put the title on the screen, you can look it up and read it at your leisure. But it's just a poet I appreciated this year. Okay, so I said I wasn't going to do best book, but this is it. I'm going to say best book for me. It might not be the best book for you. I'm not necessarily saying you have to go read this, but let me tell you why I really enjoyed, so much so, The Idle Thoughts of an Idle Fellow by Jerome K. Jerome. I've talked about him here and there on the channel. I've also talked about him and included some of his work in our Reasons to Read mail club, the physical mail club I send out once a month. But I found this book. What is it, first of all? It's an essay collection, which if you're like in high school or recently graduated from high school, you're probably throwing up just hearing the word essay. It's not like that. They're pretty good. But it's an humorous essay collection from, I think, 1886. He's a British writer or English writer. There were so many moments in this book when I was like actively chuckling to myself in a coffee shop. And then in the next paragraph, I would be like in very deep contemplation about who I am as a person. He'll talk about just about anything and everything, and just like a good comedian would, he is telling you something funny, and he's like, isn't it weird how we all XYZ? Isn't it weird how when you rent an apartment, landlords are always like this? But then he ties in like real life, not in a moralistic way, just in a way where all of a sudden he takes those observations and then turns them and, just sees the world so clearly in a funny way that all of a sudden you see your own life in a new way. It's probably not going to be for everybody, but if you would like to give it a go, I could recommend that my 2 favorite ones by far were On Being in the Blues, which is about just like getting how you get depressed at night sometimes, and it's like somehow he makes it funny, and On Memory, which On Memory is the closing essay of the book, and it's the one that like I think cemented this book as, I will say, my top book of the year. If you'd be interested in trying it, On Memory and On Being in the Blues are the 2 I'd recommend. You can find them online, dip your toe in the water. Okay, so the next one I finished actually this morning, and it's my first book by Ursula K. Le Guin that I've ever read, and it's A Wizard of Earthsea, which I got this really lovely old 1980s copy, I think, from Thrift Books, not sponsored, would like to be. And if you haven't read any of the Earthsea books, like I had not prior to this one, it is fantasy. It's like, at least on the back it says, it's like Lord of the Rings or Narnia. So it's going to be in that children's fantasy realm. Having read all of those things, having read the Lord of the Rings, the Narnia books, and now at least the first book in this trilogy, my comparison would be it is closer to the pacing of something like Narnia, as in it's a pretty short book, right? So it's not a slog, and it's more of a children's story in that way. But the way the words are written it's a lot more like Lord of the Rings. So it's not as easy to read as an Narnia book. I think it's probably a little more dense for a children's book. Just it's very beautiful in the way it's written, and I really enjoyed it. I'm curious what it would have been like to come across this book as a child. But I really enjoyed it. So Earthsea, there's really beautiful maps in here. I'm not usually a big map guy, but these ones were great. But Earthsea, yeah, it's just a place, a fictional world where it's mostly water with a bunch of little islands, and there's a young wizard named Ged, and it's his story of him learning coming up. I've heard it compared to Harry Potter before, just the whole idea of a wizard's school. And there are elements of that. Ged, the sorcerer, does end up going to a school, but it's much less kind of a romp and like, hurrah, we're learning all of these spells together. And it's much more of a solo adventure for a good chunk of it. It's a lot more contemplative. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you might want to try it out. I will definitely be reading the second and third books in the series just to give it a go. Hopefully I can find copies that match this one, because I did buy this used online. Okay, up next. This is another book I had never heard of until I picked it up, which is the way I find a lot of books actually these days. Silas Marner by George Eliot. So George Eliot, if you aren't familiar, is the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, woman writing under a man's name in like mid-1800s. I just wrote a Substack post on this, so I will try and be brief by just glossing over what it is about. You can go read that if you want my full thoughts. It is a story about a weaver in a small town who is falsely accused of a crime and then has to go into exile, or chooses to leave his town really to go into exile. And then he becomes like a miser, a hermit. He's all alone, but he finds the joy in life through a little orphan child. It's like actually it's really heartwarming. It's a little dense, but it's not terrible. I'd say it's easier to read than like Pride and Prejudice. Or maybe around on that bar. It's been a minute since I read Pride and Prejudice. But in my Substack, I did compare this book as a cross between three books. So Pride and Prejudice, A Christmas Carol, and The Count of Monte Cristo kind of, to me, all come together, share their DNA, and create Silas Marner. Okay, we're making some progress. The stack is still pretty large. Short story collection by Wendell Berry called Stand By Me. I'm going to preface this by saying if you've never read anything by Wendell Berry, I don't know that I would start with this book. Let me tell you a little bit about him and why I think he's a great author and why you might want to read his books if you haven't heard of him.
Can I be slightly noisy for a second?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay. What are you doing?
We're going to get our fruit that we're bringing.
Okay.
Okay, then.
I'm through like 5 of the books already.
What?
I'm through like 5 of the books.
Oh, wow, that's fast.
Most of Wendell Berry's fiction takes place in the same town, Port William, Kentucky. It's a fictional town. It's based on his experiences growing up, but basically he just talks about this small town and the people who live there over the course of a century and change. And so you could read any book and it's almost like reading a family history where you'll just hear about different people, different places, not just one family, but the history of the whole town. And so this book I read, having read a couple of those novels already, and it's a collection of 18 short stories set in that town. So I was familiar with the characters. I was really in love with the place. If you've ever wanted basically to like start a farm and, leave the big city and, just slow down a little bit and just walk around, these novels might be for you. And so I really recommend pick up any Wendell Berry book. The ones off the top of my head that I'd say are pretty good are Jayber Crow, Hannah Coulter, Nathan Coulter. Those are the only ones I can say for sure I've read. He also writes essays and poetry, which I also really enjoy. So Wendell Berry, I think I actually have a Substack post about him as an author, so I will link to that below. If this idea sounds interesting to you, you can read that and find a book from there. Okay, taking a mid-video break to pause and remind you that obviously you can just, watching videos about books is totally fine and great, and I'm making a video about books. But hopefully by the time you leave this video, you have at least one book that sounds interesting enough to you that you could, add it to your cart or your library holds list and then go and read that book. I like when people watch the videos and, comment and subscribe and whatever. But I'd really rather you take inspiration from this video and find a book that, you can carry with you in life rather than, take me and carry me with you through life. My goal is to get you to one of these books as quick as possible. So if you find something that sounds interesting, pause this, go, add it to your cart or something somewhere. And then, you can come back and finish. Or do whatever you want. First of all, this one's the prize for maybe the prettiest book I own. but definitely the prettiest book of the year. It doesn't have a year in it, but I think it's like early 1900s, maybe 1916, 1928. I don't know why I'm saying those dates. The essay collection, Not That It Matters by A.A. Milne. Not That It Matters. If you couldn't guess, it's another humorous essay collection by a dead British author. A.A. Milne, if that name sounds familiar, he's the Winnie the Pooh guy, but he also wrote other stuff. And I came across this, I don't even recall how, actually. It's a collection of like a bunch of 5 or 6 page essays, again, humorous, where he just like, let's talk about whatever. And so for a while I would read this before I went to bed. I'd read like, one essay and then go to sleep. I really need to talk about this word essay because I've used it for a couple of books so far, and if you haven't read essays before, probably I sound either like the most boring person in the world or the most snobbish person in the world. I am not the kind of person who is like reading academic papers. That is not at all what we're talking about. An essay, think of it, think of it like a blog post. Think of it literally like somebody who writes blogs. That is what this is. It is just, they did not have the internet back then. He's just writing some thoughts that aren't a story. It's just nonfiction, but it's written in an interesting way. I'll just recommend one. I don't know if it's even my favorite one in here, but if you look up the essay My Library by A.A. Milne, he talks about how he organizes his books on his bookshelf. Actually, he talks about how he really doesn't organize his books on his bookshelf and how they just are all over the place. And I felt like relatable to that. My books are all over the place. So, yeah, A.A. Milne, Not That It Matters, but you can find, they're all in the public domain, so you can find them online if you can't get a lovely copy like this. Up next, some more short stories. This one might be something you've read, or at least some of the stories. I had to study some of these in college. A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. This is just one of the more out there things I've read. Let me try and describe it to you. O'Connor was Catholic, but you wouldn't know it to read the books. Pretty much everyone in the stories, almost without fail, is miserable. Very religious and very hypocritical, very nasty, I don't remember any characters in this book I liked. All of them, they're all just kind of nasty, awful. But somehow I still really liked the book. I've talked to someone, a couple people actually, about when religion comes up in books, whether you're religious or not, it can feel like a lose-lose. Either it gets portrayed as like a really great thing and it feels kind of like a sermon, or it gets portrayed as a really nasty thing and then it feels like misrepresenting someone's faith. So it's tricky. So I'm not recommending this as something where I'm saying this shows religion for what it is. She shows the dirt, but she does in fact show the dirt. And I think it works for me because I know she's coming at it as a very devoutly religious person who is just telling stories about human nature, and humans, religious or not, sometimes are just awful, awful people. And I feel like this is more of a human expose than like a religious expose. Anyway, the book is full of stories like this. Southern Gothic, like 1940s, 50s, I'm going to say. Usually characters are very petty. There's a lot of swindling that goes on. There's some murder. There's some death. Some pretty wild stuff. Everything's very stark and very bleak. And there's a lot of people who act like they know more than they do, and a lot of very rude people. I don't know. I think you can get a good picture of humanity by reading all sorts of types of books. Like if you read something more like Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury, you get a very warm, nostalgic feeling, and you're inspired of the good in people, which is good, because I don't think it's a good idea to wallow in all the bad things that are happening in the world. But if you read something like A Good Man is Hard to Find, and you just think of all the ways people can be bad to each other, in moderation to read something like that, I think it can be helpful. And just honestly, if you only read one, I would say the title story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, is pretty phenomenal. I did have to read it in college. I don't remember caring for it, but also assigned reading has that tang to it, doesn't it? When you're told to read a book, all of a sudden, it's not that interesting. So optionally, if you want, you could read this book. Okay, let's knock out 3 books all at once. I didn't think this through. It's a trilogy, so I'll show you the first one. The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. Unfortunately, it has this Netflix sticker on it. It's not even a sticker, it's just part of the cover. What are you going to do? Oh well. That's one of my least favorite things about books. When they come with the Netflix sticker, or as seen on TikTok sticker or something like that, I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man, although I probably am. I can never take that off, so whatever. When Netflix is long obsolete. Oh, who knows, maybe in like 50 years it'll be like cool and vintage. Anyway, the book, I've talked about this before, but It's Chinese science fiction. I'm going to go out and say hard science fiction, like as in like they talk a lot about the science. It's not like Star Wars where it's like there's a hyperdrive. Like they will talk to you about how to unfold a photon in 11 dimensions. And you're like, I don't know if that's real. But the reason that this and the sequel, The Dark Forest, and the double sequel, Death's End, which together are a whopping 1,500 pages total. The reason that this is on my best books of the year list is just because I haven't read anything else like it. It was totally immersive. It was very long. And for a book like this, I really enjoyed that it was that long. So let me tell you a little bit about what this book in this series is, and then maybe you can pick it up. What if humans knew aliens were coming? You know, they were on their way, but they wouldn't be here for like 400 years, and we had time to prepare for that. What would that do just to humanity? You know, what would we need to change about ourselves, and what would we need to do to prepare, and what's our plan? It's much more complicated than that. It's not simply an alien invasion story, and there's not a whole lot of like pew pew blaster fighting. It's a lot more slow paced than that and a lot more technical, but oh my gosh, is it good. So it's basically an epic. It sprawls over like 400 years. So by the end of the series, like characters you met are mostly all dead. There's some hibernation, so sometimes we'll meet different characters from different eras and stuff. It's just phenomenal though. Cixin Liu is a genius, I'm convinced. This is one of the few books I'm recommending by a living author. He is alive, as far as I know. So if you're on the hunt for like a bunch of books that you can just immerse yourself in a story that's gonna, you know, pay dividends on the way, I would say this one for sure. It is definitely a little unconventional, and maybe it's the intercultural thing, or maybe it's the just type of book I'm not used to reading, but I think that's why I really enjoyed it. So the world building's amazing. I mean, it's our own world, but it's an alternate future, so I think it still counts as world building. It's so good. I forgot about this when I put it in the stack. I forgot how good I thought it was. So definitely strange. I think all of these I've recommended have been strange, but I would recommend all three of these books to you. Our third, and I promise final, collection of essays. So if you have heard me talk about the essays so far and you're like, I don't need it, you can skip to the next book. That's totally fine. But this is A Sense of Life by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I think I talked about it a couple of videos ago. I want to recommend Saint-Exupéry to you as an author, period. So anything of his that he's written, you could have equal success liking. But he's the author of The Little Prince. That's probably the book you would have known by him. That's fiction. But he's written a lot of other either nonfiction or fiction that is based really heavily on his real life experience. His experience being a pilot, both to fly like mail. He flew mail between Europe and all these sorts of places. He's just dropping off mail. And then also as a pilot during World War II, and he actually disappeared on a World War II flight. It just, the plane just went off and he never came back, presumed dead. He's just a pretty epic guy. Just very interesting to read. And these essays are posthumously published. They're a bunch of short pieces that he wrote when he was like a war correspondent during the Spanish Civil War and some other places. So why did I like this book so much? When I'm not in a war currently, the Spanish Civil War, like I barely knew about it. I don't think I would have passed any sort of test on even when it was. Why do essays about that interest me, right? The whole thread through this book is, what does it mean to be just a person with people who disagree with you pretty strongly? Right, in his case, in a war, right? We have people on both sides of a war, a civil war, who believe they're fighting for a good cause. And he talks about that in World War II as well. Those are the ideas in this book that I really treasured. I don't have an answer for you about the question, how do you deal with people you disagree with strongly? But if you've ever felt like, man, there's just no way all of us people are going to agree, and I just know people who make me so mad, and I can't see eye to eye, like we might as well be speaking different languages, and you feel like you're in a war, you don't want to be, but you feel like you're in one. This book gave me some hope, I think, in that. Because I don't want to feel, at odds with other people. I want us all to get along. But sometimes it doesn't feel like it's going to work out. So that's why I liked this book. He just writes in a very interesting way, too. I will say, Saint-Exupéry, across the board, writes in a very poetic way. Maybe it's a result of him being, a French author. But I think even for like French authors I've read, it's like very, very over the top. So that might put you off. Sometimes it is difficult to read. You can watch some earlier videos in this channel where I talk about him, and if any quote sticks out at you, go read that book. So off the top of my head, there's this one with some of his essays. There is Flight to Arras and Wind, Sand, and Stars are the ones that I would recommend if he sounds interesting to you. But be aware, it is definitely not just like a joyride of a novel. It is going to be philosophy disguised as a novel. Okay, and then I'll do 3 books together that are all based around the same topic. So these 3 are all writing books. If you're not interested in writing, I actually still think 1 or 2 of these might be really interesting to you, but I'll talk about them hopefully briefly. Zen in the Art of Writing by Ray Bradbury. I don't love everything Ray Bradbury writes. Sometimes I think he is a little bit purple in his writing. It's like too much. I know some people really can't get over that. But of all the writing books I've read, this one I think is the most inspirational. Like if you are interested in writing, read this on January 1st. Just go for it. It's so good. I starred like every page. That said, it is not just fluffy encouragement of like trying to get you to get pumped up. He has a lot of really practical things that I have taken into my own writing practice. I don't know how he gets to both be the most inspirational book I've read and give me the most practical tips. So I may talk about some of those ideas in a future video if I do a video on writing. If you're curious in the meantime, I think some of them I talked about in this interview I did with Fabio Cerpelloni. He's an Italian YouTuber and author. And we talked a little bit about writing and reading in an interview here. So if you are just bored and you'd like to watch something for an hour and maybe hear my thoughts about writing, you could go there. I will not put them here. This one, I'll just briefly mention Several Short Sentences About Writing by Verlyn Klinkenberg. Again, this is just if you're interested in writing. It basically just examines the fundamental job of a writer, which he argues is to write sentences. Making sure, do your sentences say what you think you're saying or not? And you'd be surprised how often they don't say what you think you're saying. So a very quick read, very enjoyable. Fabio Cerpelloni, who I mentioned a second ago, put me onto this book. Very good book if you're interested in writing. And then this book, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, is a writing book, but the way it's done is it takes 7 short stories by different Russian authors, and he's using these stories to show you why certain stories work and why they resonate with you. And that sounds like it could be really academic, but it's not. I actually felt like I was an English classic in the best possible way, and I was reading a story and being like, oh, I enjoyed this. And then he broke it down, and I felt like I enjoyed it even more. It didn't feel like, oh, I hope you enjoyed that story. Let me tell you about all the symbolism in it so you can, I can ruin it for you. Like it opened my eyes to what the story was. So this was an introduction for me kind of into a bunch of different Russian authors. So I ended up reading some more Chekhov and some more Tolstoy as the year went on. I'm still working on some of those books, which is why you're not seeing them in this end video. But if you are interested in writing or Russian literature, either one, I think this is a great book for you. And then last but not least are 2 books that are not here for 2 reasons. One, I forgot. So let me tell you about that one. This is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. One of my very favorite books of the year, recommended to me by Matt over at Colossum Books. It is like historical fiction, but kind of supernatural and very speculative. So it is about the death of Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie, which is factual. And most of it takes place in sort of this dream in-between world where Willie has died, but he has not yet gone, on to judgment or to heaven or to hell or anywhere. He's just dead. And he's in this in-between phase with all these other ghostly figures who have, for whatever reason, chosen not to move on to the next phase of their life. Call it purgatory, call it the Bardo, I believe is, another term for it. And it's written in a very strange way. It's written, those sections, like a play. Where it'll have the attribution for who said something, and then it will have their line. And it's written with a lot of misspellings, like intentionally, depending on who the character is. And it's very, very strange. But after a couple of chapters, I really got into it, and it made the book better. At first glance, it might look pretentious or it might look like nonsensical. And it is an experimental book, but I really just can't say enough good things about Lincoln in the Bardo. It really is, if you are, dealing with or thinking about grief or reconciliation or all these things, the world is a hard place and you're just wondering about that. This was a very healing and inspirational book, not in a preachy way, not in a moralistic way. It just felt good to read. It's a very gloomy book, but I think in a great way. And then the last book, the reason that it's not here is because it was an audiobook. So the last book I'm going to recommend to you today is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And this is a very recent book. It's probably the most mainstream book I'm going to recommend. And it's mainstream for a reason. It's phenomenal. If you have not read any of his books, he's the guy who also wrote The Martian, that became the movie with Matt Damon. And I listened to The Martian too, and I did really enjoy it, but Project Hail Mary, by far, as an audiobook, one of my favorite reading experiences of the year. Project Hail Mary, if you could just guess, is a sci-fi story about someone who is taking a long shot to save humanity. We need a solution to this made-up problem that I will not tell you what the problem is, but we need a solution for it, and we need it now. And, someone is going to have to go and try and do it. So that's what this guy is trying to do. It's written mostly in first person as someone doing recorded logs of what their day is like as the astronaut, the main character. And so that works really well in an audiobook format. You just have someone explaining it to you. Also, the voice actor, I will put his name at the bottom of the screen. It escapes me at the moment. So good. I'm not always into audiobooks, but this one was amazing. So give that a shot. And with that said, I'm getting a blinking battery notification on the camera, and I'm tired of sitting here and talking, and I would rather be reading, and I'm sure you would be too. I know I've missed something. I know I've left a great book off. I know I have over-explained some things and under-explained some things, but hopefully, if you found one book off this list that you can take into 2026 and enjoy, I feel like I've done my job, and hopefully we can both go and have a great time reading. So have a great day, enjoy your reading, and I will see you next time. Peace.